This is the case of Juan Rodriguez, whose twins died in a car where he had gone into work, and 8 hours later they died of overheating. There were sporadic quotes given in the news, which makes it always difficult for us to analyze, but this is an example within training that is most beneficial as we follow and trust the language. In trusting the language, thus far, has served me well. It hasn't proven me wrong, and on 1 or 2 open cases, I believe it will as time goes on. But what happens when the language is in confliction with what seems like common sense or reality? And this is where we trust in the language. Police had responded to him calling 911, and they wrote down, as they often do in New York City police, the immediate things that come out of his mouth. What are the first things he said to us? And this is how it's reported. This is how it's on the original affidavit, of which he was arrested and he's out on bail. Here's what he said. I assumed I dropped them at daycare before I went to work. So responding to police, what happened? I blanked out, and this was given in a cry or a scream form. And although we don't deal with inflection, I've included it because in the report they have it with an exclamation mark, which I didn't include. Somewhat prejudicial. My babies are dead. I killed my babies. So there's several things that I'd like to talk about with this now that I think would be helpful, especially for those of you that wish to go and be formally trained in statement analysis. We offer the complete statement analysis course that's done in your home, as well as for seminars for police and for business and military intelligence, etc. In the course, you will come up against some things that will be difficult, somewhat challenging in the very least, for those that are mildly familiar, say through blogs or common reading. The actual work that's put to place, especially in team analysis, where you're able to rub shoulders against some great professionals, is very useful. Well, here's something that doesn't come across very well for him, especially in this scenario. I've been asked, how is it possible that someone forgot his infant twins in the backseat of his car? And then immediately begins the projection, which we all do, which analysts are trained to try to withhold. And I am no different here in the projection in my thoughts. And I have 2 thoughts about that. Is number 1, having been a father and now a grandfather, and having driven children in car seats and infants in car seats, generally speaking, I'm always engaged with them. I'm always looking up at the mirror, and I'm always talking back and forth and playing music for them, and it's just a normal routine. That's me, though, and not always everyone, and I have to be careful with that. But there's something else that's somewhat unusual about me, and it's not something I'm proud of, but I do zone out in driving directions in a terrible way. Not in a dangerous way in the sense that I'm not aware of traffic. I'm very aware of traffic, but I go in the wrong direction often in a familiar area. Where I'm in an unfamiliar area and I'm on alert, I'm okay. But in going to the same routine place that I go to routinely, regularly, I get lost. It's so acute that Heather will now follow me on an app saying, hey, you just made a left, you're going the wrong direction. On Interstate 95 here in Maine, I frequently go in the wrong direction. And after several miles, it dawns on me. What happens is I begin to concentrate on something else. It's like someone that's playing chess in their minds. And for me, usually it's a statement. But that isn't fair to project me, who does zone out, maybe not blanked out, but zoned out, routinely. I've got to remove that from the equation. So when I went into the statements, I had to be aware of my own prejudice here. I can't say, hey, I do the same thing. Because someone else will say, I don't do that. And well, where does the analysis fall? So we have to always be aware of our own prejudice and projections into a statement. We want to take out of the statement what's in it, not put ourselves into it in this sense of projection. We do want to be in his shoes. We want to understand him. So here's a brief rundown of the statements that he made. He begins with the pronoun I, which means he has a strong psychological presence. He's right there, right now, speaking to the police. He is not distancing himself. Psychologically, he's not omitting the pronoun. He doesn't use the pronoun we. And people that are alone that use the pronoun we wish not to be alone psychologically. He said, I assumed I dropped them at daycare before I went to work. And there's several things of importance here. We have the strong psychological presence. He's alone with this because he is alone in the responsibility, which we'll get to. Some have said the word assumed is an unnecessary qualifier. It is not. The context dictates this. He could not say, looking at his dead children, I dropped them off at daycare. That would be a direct fabrication of reality. That would be a confrontation of internal stress of lying. So what he said was, I assumed, which is a necessary part given the context. What he had done was dropped off an older child at an older daycare and kept on going, assumed he dropped off the infants, who I assume was quiet, I don't know, went to work as a social worker for 8 hours, came out on time, and found the horrific tragedy of the dead children. There's something else to notice here. There's no qualifiers, there's strong commitment, there's no equivocation of anything, but he didn't leave the children. Had he left them in his verbalized perception of reality, it would have been flagged for possible deception in the high sensitivity. He didn't leave them in the car. In his verbalized perception of reality, he went to work. In other words, what he's showing us, his brain is moving forward, not pausing. What I mean by that with the word left is that the word left is like a pause. I'm in my office and I went to the kitchen. If I said I was in my office, I left my office and went to the kitchen, you know that it's not possible for me to get to the kitchen without leaving my office. The extra wording of leaving means there's more to it, and we're going to focus on that and ask questions about that. He didn't leave them in his verbalized perception of reality. He went forward. This sentence by itself has like a 90% plus rating of reliability. It's strong. And he must answer the whys in the hows. It is presupposed in the situation, in the context. And he said, I blanked out. Whether cry or scream makes no difference. I want to look at the words. So I then remove this and this. Even though we recognize the police are looking at a form of non-legal form, of course, but a form of excited utterance, just like a 911 call, what is said. I blanked out. There is no shifting of any blame. There is no qualifying of what it means to blank out. He blanked out is something that he believes, something that he believes. These are very reliable on their form statements. And then he said, my babies are dead. I killed my babies. And the pronouns don't lie. He's telling the truth. And we look at the order of what Caesar said. The order is the victims first. My babies are dead. Secondly, he says, I killed my babies. He's taking ownership of these things. This is something, I killed my babies, which is not an embedded admission. This is something of an example of taking personal responsibility. We look at personal responsibility in two ways, especially in employment analysis. There are those who take personal responsibility, and there are those who verbalize the taking of personal responsibility. In hiring recovering addicts, we often find in their language a very strong personal responsibility for everything, sometimes too much. In those that are actively using, we will find a declaration of taking personal responsibility rather than the actual taking of it in the language. And there's a difference most counselors would understand there. They are my babies. The pronoun my takes possession of them, and they remain my babies whether they're dead or whether I killed them. He's telling the truth. As a matter of fact, if he was asked this question with this language, this question with this language, and this question with this language in a polygraph, he's going to pass. outside information now. We have some updates. He apparently has, and I say apparent because it's reported in the media, a good reputation as a father, someone that's been very involved in his children's lives, and someone that seems to relish holidays with them and birthdays and celebrations. And I happen to notice some of the photos of him. He doesn't post photos of his children so much as they're photos of himself with his children. His older children from a second marriage talked about what a great father he is. The neighbors talked about what a great father he is. All that, it will weigh on us just like projection will, but we have to be aware of it and have to push it aside for this purpose. These sentences here are all reliable. They are consistent. So what about the blame? I killed my babies. This brought up some good questions. Innocent parents will torture themselves when something goes wrong, the death of a child, for example. You may recall an interview on radio that I had done years ago with the father of a murdered, I think she was 19 or 20 years old. And he had blamed himself for it because many years, maybe a decade earlier, he had taken a job and moved to the state where she was murdered from. He said, if I didn't take that job, she'd still be here today. Okay? That's the language of one who was innocent. Contrary to this type of straightforward language, you can see in John and Patsy Ramsey, two famous examples, where they not only shift the priority from the victim to themselves, what we have in their language, but you also saw it in the McCann case, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, where interview after interview, from the beginning, the McCann showed their priority was themselves. We always look for the linguistic disposition. What does the subject linguistically show his disposition towards the victim is? And in this case, they are my babies, not even the babies. And they're my babies which are dead as a priority, and I am responsible. Comes right after. So we have this close association. This is a positive or expected linguistic disposition. The disposition of when a child goes missing should be what my child needs, what my child is going through, what the kidnapper should do, including anything from hugs and kisses, as repulsive that may seem. The parent only cares about the child's comfort. When you hear a parent that is most actively engaged in self-defense, you're looking at a parent who needs to defend self. When it comes in an open interview, it's often an indicator of guilt. In those cases, there was the lack of responsibility. What I expected the McCanns to say was something I should not have left them. I left them. Not we left them, I left them from each biological parent. And that wasn't there. I expected to hear concern for what Madeleine was experiencing. Madeleine needed her teddy bear or her favorite toy or her certain color blanket. You need to sing this song to her. You need to do that to her. Police will often personalize the kidnapper or coach the parents to personalize. But it's almost instinctive where the parent has now a level of frustration that we can only know through the language. Impotency. When Madeleine or John Bonet fell, I, the parent, picked them up and comforted them. When they got a boo-boo, I put a Band-Aid on it. When they cried for hunger, I fed them. And now I can't help them. And so we expect in the language this exasperation that is very difficult to even understand except through the language. And that's absent. The priority is different. So in this case, I believe the subject is telling the truth. I cannot explain how he blanked out, and whether we hear later on medication, PTSD as a war veteran, diet, nutrition, ill health, insomnia, whatever it may be, I don't know, and I don't pretend to know. I know my own problem, but I don't know his. I must keep this out, my thoughts out, and allow the language to speak for itself. Perhaps we will get an answer, perhaps in court testimony. I did notice this morning that prosecutors have stepped back and are slow walking this, allowing for further investigation. It appears to me that they likely believe him, that he's telling the truth, and to that his words agree.